Hello everyone, welcome to the second day of our symposium again. In this session, we will be honored by Professor MUSCHERT's speech. Let me give you a brief information about him, if you will. Professor MUSCHERT is Professor of Sociology in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Khalifa University, Abu Dhabi. He holds a PhD in Sociology from the University of Colorado and the BS in the International Studies from Bristol University. He has formerly served on the Faculty of Sociology, Social Justice and Media Studies at Miami University and the Law and Society Faculty at Purdue University. His academic expertise lies in the sociological study of social problems and their solutions via social policy and the use of digital technologies in social and economic developments. In the academic fields of sociology, media studies, and justice studies, he has written or edited a dozen academic volumes and special collections of journals, dozens of peer-reviewed academic articles, and dozens of chapters in academic volumes. He is currently serving as the Secretary of the Society for the Study of Social Problems, has served in various editorial positions on academic journals, and is the lead project manager for the book series Agenda for Social Justice. Now we will be hearing Professor Glan's New Media, New Society speech. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I would say salamlar, hocamlar, merhabalar, hoş bulduk, çok hoş bulduk. Peace and greetings to all of my colleagues, and I am very happy to be here. I'm happy to be here. And I see in attendance some people are familiar to me. Dr. Eyüp, nice to see you in particular, and Professor Atatürk is probably here as well. Sinan. And so thank you all so much for being here today and for giving me this opportunity to speak. I'm going to share my screen if that is that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So excuse me for the delay. Just take a moment to get it going. Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Duygu, for the kind introduction today. I only wish that I was able to be there in person in Erzurum, as I have visited a number of times and been very welcome there, and hope to come back one day soon when the pandemic is no longer a problem for travel. So yeah, I am currently based in Abu Dhabi at Khalifa University of Science and Technology in the UAE. And so I just put up our logos here. It's always nice to see us. And I give in particular gratitude to Anadolu Üniversitesi and Atatürk Üniversitesi for the hosting this conference today and for having me here. I also, as I mentioned, thank you to Dr. Sinan and Dr. Eyüp for the kind invitation to be here today. It's very much a pleasure. So my talk is called New Media and New Society, and it's a very serious topic. However, it is also not a very serious talk, okay? So I think I have some things that are important to say. At the same time, I sometimes feel I don't have anything to say. I have nothing to say. I hope it will be somewhere in the middle where some of the things I say could be important, but not everything. Don't expect everything I say to be very serious. Okay, and so I'm taking the theme of the conference on communication in the millennium as being an invitation to speak in a very kind of broad, sweeping way about how I see our field of, I am a sociologist, but I work in communications as well, how I see these fields and moving into the new millennium. And I will give a little bit of a perspective of the last, say, 20 years or so of what I've been doing. Okay, so the overview of the presentation is I want to you're probably already familiar with it, but I want to give you a knowledge of Clarke's laws, right? This is Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction author, the British science fiction author. I would like to give a little bit of disclaimer, and then I would like to speak about what I call the problematic, or one of the problems that I see with our field of inquiry. I would also like to suggest some ways forward. And then in the end, I would like to introduce you to this project that I've been working on with some colleagues, particular Dr. Murat Şentürk at Istanbul University and Dr. Massimo Ragnera at Northumbria University in the UK. And it's called New Media, New Society. So Clarke's laws, Arthur C. Clarke, the 2001 science fiction author, he said that number one is when a distinguished but elderly scientist states that something is possible, he is almost certainly right. When he states that something is impossible, he is very probably wrong. Okay, so I am neither distinguished or famous, and nor am I entirely yet elderly. So I ask you to take this with a bit of caution, that maybe I'm going to say things are possible. I might be right. If I say things are impossible, I'm probably wrong as well. And he also, number two, said the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. Okay, so the idea here is that I want to push the limits, and I do it with humor in some ways, but maybe in some other ways I push the limits just a little bit. And that the last is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And so it's interesting because Arthur C. Clarke, who was a science fiction writer, spoke about magic and how the technologies seem to be a magic to those people who are not very familiar with it, right? But so nowadays we work with all sorts of things which must seem to be magic to previous generations, things like big data and smartphones and things like that. And in fact, they're not that long ago, something like an iPhone was a matter of science fiction. Right. There was a TV show in the 1980s in America. I'm not sure if it came overseas, but it was called Quantum Leap. And there was a character who would jump in time into different places. And he had a helper with him, but the guy wasn't a real guy. He was a hologram. And this hologram had a little device that had all of the answers basically to the universe. So whenever they needed information, he would ask his hologram friend, and his friend would go onto his little device and he would find the answers. The difference is that I think at the time we thought that the answers would actually be in the device. We didn't think of the connectivity of the device to take us to, the place where the answers are held. But nonetheless, the universal availability of information is something that went from science fiction to reality in my life, right? It seemed like magic at the time. How could they possibly do that? Now it seems as if everybody takes it for granted. And in fact, we have panic attacks if we're cut off from, people are addicted to their connectivity. People are having panic attacks if they're cut off. Okay, so these are the three Clarke's laws. And now I would like to give a disclaimer. The disclaimer basically says, I am not responsible. Okay, and so I want to make a disclaimer about nothing, anything, something, and everything. And I was trying to think of, since most of our colleagues here are Turkish, I would think is like, I don't know the exact words in Turkish, but it's like yok, right? There isn't, right? Anything might be başka, I think, and then something is bir şey, and everything is her şey. Right? And so I'm giving a talk that's about nothing, everything, something, and everything, all at the same time. And so I would say, you know, in the spirit of Arthur C. Clarke's laws, I would say that I know nothing, I know anything, I know something, and I also know everything. Right? I would also say it's not possible to know nothing. It's not possible to know anything. It's not possible to know something, and it's not possible to know everything. Now, the purpose of this talk is to introduce you ultimately to this project that I hatched with my colleagues and about new media and new society. So the basic question is, has new media, the new media forms and practices, have they brought about new forms of association or sociality, new society? And so the new media is like kind of taken as a given, and then there's a slash in there divided by new society, right? If we look at it as kind of an equation, and we might put in there like an equal sign or a not equal sign. But the question is that are we just seeing things that are repeated, or are we seeing things that are we seeing things that are you know, truly new? And I have, this is actually an image I found on the internet. I don't know why, but somebody trademarked the words everything and nothing. I didn't think it would be possible to trademark everything, because it's, in a sense, everything is nothing, right? So I don't know, but I just found it kind of interesting how the capitalism bleeds into this kind of concept of everything and nothing. All right, so the problem, having given you my disclaimer, the problem is that there are too many media effects, right? There are so many media effects, and I don't make a claim that this is an exhaustive list. This is just a list that I made of ones that I have remembered over the last, say, 20 years or something like that. But, you know, simulation, misinformation, fake news, right? Balkanization, intersectionality, assemblages, affordances, liquefations, disruption, fragmentation, saturation, distraction, propaganda, mediatization, culture wars, colonizations or post-colonization, decolonization, modes of signification, gamification, crowdsourcing, participatory media, hypertext, assimilation, chaos, spectacles, VR, AR, digital transformation, disconnection, mass surveillance, the Internet of Things, cyborgology, all these sorts of things. And so, you know, it's just a presentation, right? But like, so like each of these terms, there's a whole literature that ensues from these concepts. And so when I look at the field of media studies, I'm thinking of like, we're studying sort of like everything. But at the same time, I sometimes feel that can we identify like something or anything that we are specifically studying outside of just media and media forms? Okay, so for example, I sometimes would be caught up in this a bit of a philosophical conversation with myself about why, if everything is intersectional, then why is everything also at the same time supposed to be fragmented, right? And so I kind of get to the philosophy of social science when I think about these things, right? And so also the second problem is that there are so many social concepts, right? So just with regards to media, do we have an information society, the network society, the internet society? I mean, information superhighway, cyber society, new media society, post-industrial, all the posts, right? Post-industrialism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, post-humanism, post-9/11, post-COVID, right? We have a risk society, we have the Anthropocene, we have futurisms, we have the liquid society, we have the rhizomatic society, affordances, disruption, hyperreality, metaverse, digital sociology, whatever that is, and versions of society being 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and so on. And so I take you to the image I captured of the conference website. And so I was thinking about, it's like, yes, the brave new digital world as communication research in the context of society 5.0. And I'm like, it's one of these things where I'm thinking like, okay, so what exactly is this about? Right. And then I have this long list of things where, I'm not going to read them out to you, but it's digital everything, right? Digital access, commerce, rights, media, reality, all this stuff. And I kind of think like, okay, like this is like everything, right? It's everything. It's everything, Hershey. So it takes me to this is called the BSOD, right? Blue screen of death. If you have a Windows computer, this is the blue screen of death. It takes me to this check to make sure any new hardware or software is properly installed. If this is a new installation, ask your hardware and software for any Windows updates you might need, blah, 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 blah. Disable BIOS, memory, caching components, disable, restart your computer, Control Alt Delete, F8, unplug, replug, startup, shut down. Like all of these kinds of things. Safe mode is what we need. Safe mode is what we need, right? And why is this happening? It's because your computer has been infected with a virus, right? This is like the kind of thing where the pop-ups show up and everybody's like, oh, wait, our system is infected with a virus. Not really. So the solution then is we reboot. Okay, we reboot. So we reboot our system. Okay, we reboot our system. However, what about rebooting or resetting the mind? Okay, so if we've become people who study everything, then how can we identify anything or something that we actually study as our focus? Okay, if we study everything, are we actually studying nothing? That's kind of the question that I ask. And so if I had a button back here, maybe I would like to reset, or hit that Control Alt Delete, and then, get out of this crash system, get out of this virus and see where I come back to. Okay, so the question therefore is this: is there a need for a new project? Is there a need for a new project? So I've already mentioned that. I guess I have implied, yes, there's a need for a new project, which we call new media, new society, with that question mark there, new media, new society, and that focuses on media and social relations. So the question I've been engaged with in this kind of trajectory of research is that, can we describe our society as a new media society? In other words, like, does new media just kind of like change, just integrate with society and the old dynamics of social relations continue? Or do we in fact see new things and new dynamics happening that are, as the new media become integrated? Okay, so has new media spawned new society? And so when I think as a social theorist, I think of that like, are there novel forms of social organization? Are there new practices of social interaction, right? Swipe right, swipe left, I don't know. Are there new identities, new solidarities, right? Or changing identities, changing solidarities? And are there new material or symbolic structures that result from the use of this new media as well? Okay, so I leave it as a question: is there a need for a new project such as New Media, New Society? I don't know. Actually, I hope there is, and I hope that I can convince you that this is the case. However, I probably will not be able to convince you that this is the case. Right. So I wanted to give, this is me, MUSCHERT, I wanted to give you my take on Clarke's laws. Right. So we have the 3 laws at the top from Arthur C. Clarke that I started out with, and I have MUSCHERT 1, and I don't claim it's a law. It's just something that I'm saying. Right. But MUSCHERT 1 says a theory to understand new media and new society is possible. Right. And it also says a theory to understand new media and society is not possible. This is probably right and wrong. This statement is probably right and wrong at the same time. Okay, so number 2 is that media and social theorists must attempt the impossible. We have certain tools, we know what we can do, but as Irving Goffman wrote about this edge work, it's the people who are on the edge, it's the people who are on the margin, it's the people who are engaged in the weird topics, in the controversial topics, that are the people who are going to push the boundaries. And so this is something that we also need to do. Maybe we can do the things that are impossible or things that seem impossible. Okay, and we also must study the magicians. Possibly we ourselves can become magicians. Okay, we have to peel back the curtain to view the hidden, the misleading, and the deceptive. And media are part of the magic, right? What was science fiction is now the reality, right? Which would have been magical to earlier generations is now something that is just a technical reality. But at the same time, I also feel that there's like quite a bit of like what, the French have this word légère de main, right? It's like the lightness of hand is, I think, the word that they use to talk about magic. It's sort of like, the ability to distract over here and then to, hide something in another place, right? This lightness, sleight of hand in English, légère de main in French, right? And so there's this idea that, like, I work at a technical university, which is a lot of people in engineering. And how often do I hear about, like, they're so satisfied to launch a satellite and they are so, into like data analytics and big data and AI and all of these things. And then when I start to ask them, like, well, okay, look, I'm not a computer scientist, but can you please explain to me what is AI? They have some conceptions, right? I'm not saying that they have nothing to say exactly, but at the same time, it's also like people just use these terms like fintech, right? Like, data, computational analytics, and they oftentimes use these things, and I just see it like kind of showing up in these really like agenda setting places like the Harvard Business Review and stuff. But the people who are reading it are, working in some bank, and do they really understand what any of these things mean? And so I have a suggestion that maybe we need to study the magicians, or if possible, become magicians ourselves. Like, maybe we should be learning how to code, okay? We should be learning the software and the systems architecture of the types of things that we're studying, right? So like, we oftentimes use, like, how when you give an abbreviation, you have to say what it is, right? So ICT, that's one that we all use, right? Information communication technologies. We don't necessarily even have to specify what that means because everybody knows what ICT means. But do we really know about the technology, the T part of the ICT? And that's the question. Like, if we had to sit down and sort of like actually ask, like, as the data moves and as the information moves, like, what is the trajectory, and technically how is it working, right? So I earlier mentioned this idea that everything is fragmented and everything is connected, right? Everything is intersectional, but everything is also fragmented. How can both of these be? But in truth, we are always in the in-between, right? We don't have everything at our fingertips. We also don't have nothing at our fingertips. We have some things or any things in our fingertips, right? And so this is a quote from Georg Simmel, who's one of my favorite sociologists, who said that we academics are those who make connections where connections have not been seen, and we make distinctions, or we point out differences where differences have not been seen. So at a very basic level, what we're doing is we're connecting things, and we are dividing them in a conceptual kind of way, or an analytical way, right? So when I go back, and I'm jumping ahead of myself just a little bit, but I think that there are these periods of history that are extremely fertile, rich times for new intellectual movements to emerge, right? And one of them was about the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century. And so we had these like so-called classical theorists who were engaged in the study of looking at the transition from traditional, more agricultural, village-based life into the modern urban industrial life in places like France and England and Germany and so on. And indeed, these are the places where sociology took off, because they needed a new way. I mean, I live in the Middle East now, right? And my textbook I use is written by an American for my intro to social class, and they've never heard of Zia Gökalp, and they've never heard of Ibn Khaldun, from the famous grandfather of sociology by many people, right? And so I do have to fill in these gaps, right? But anyhow, as an organized discipline, it cannot be debated that that it was in the European context that sociology developed as an organized field, with programs and journals and professional societies and departments and those kinds of things, right? So, like we look at what would be the types of new forms of association. So we have things like social bonds. Are there different types of social bonds that we're seeing in this generation, this current age, right? Are there different types of capital or power that we're seeing? Is there a different sort of rationality or a degree of rationality that we're seeing? Is there a degree of disenchantment where the world is no longer seems to be a kind of like special and meaningful? As we talk about Weber's perspectives, and are there different attitudes and practices regarding information? Maybe looking at someone like Simmel and symbolic interaction. Okay, so I think we need to go back to some classical sociological theory as to just revisit and check in, right? And so I have really done a very, very amateur job of trying to divide into these different groups of theories, right? But the one I saw as I was taking my theory classes and continuing to read back and forth with theory is that there's grand theory, right? So these grand theoretical moments where they tried to come up with a theory that would explain everything. So structural functionalism being the dominant theory in the middle of the 20th century, and American sociology, we have people like came from Durkheim, we have like Talcott Parsons and the Russian guy Sorokin, who were talking about let's study the whole society. And Marxism also, in a way, was an effort to form a grand theory that would basically explain everything. And here's where I get a little bit out there, is that I talk about psychohistory. I'm not sure if you all have read this, or there's a new series that's coming out. there's a foundation series written by the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov, and it's an interesting kind of return because one of my teachers, when I was an undergraduate student taking a sociology class, I asked him, what is the motivation? Like, why did you become a sociologist, right? And he gave the answer to say that he read Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. And the whole point of the Foundation series is that Isaac Asimov had just completed reading, as he claimed for like the third time or something, this massive history book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. So it was like, you know, one of like the big figures of history, right? And so it's just this huge book, right? Because it not only does like Roman Empire in terms of Rome, it also then continues to like the Byzantine and so on, which you all know was there for, I don't know, an additional 1,000 years almost, or something like that, past Rome and so on. Anyhow, and so the point is that he said, like, what, you know, like the Roman Empire had all of this knowledge that was from classical societies, and then what they did was, like, you know, Europe is supposed to have, it's descended for about 1,000 years into these so-called dark ages, where all of the knowledge of the past was lost, and you know, life was like pretty miserable for the people. And so Asimov said, what if this happened on a galactic level? And there was like a galaxy, an empire that covered the entire galaxy, and then that empire collapsed. Like, what would you do to like kind of reduce the dark ages? The dark ages for, you know, how long they were going to last. So Asimov then, you know, came up with this guy who is a fictional character, but is called Harry Seldon, and Harry Seldon creates a psychohistory. And psychohistory is basically like a sociometrics. It's a mathematical model for like pointing out the trajectories of history, right? And so when I went to, you know, when I was an undergraduate taking a sociology class, and then, you know, my teacher said, yeah, I studied this, I like this book, and I read this book, and I was like, oh, wow, like, is it possible? Is there a unified theory, a grand theory of society? And then, you know, I encountered like structural functionalism, which was, as I was a student, becoming unpopular, and then also discovered Marxism and other forms of conflict theories that were becoming much more popular as well. But at the same time, we encountered all of these others, right? Like ad hoc theories. I call them ad hoc theories, like the pragmatists, people like Emerson, James, Zimmel, Mead, Goffman, people who just kind of said, like, I don't know everything. I'm not completely in the realm where I know nothing. I just want to know something about anything, right? So you have these people like Irving Goffman, who says, I'm going to sit myself down in a mental hospital and I'm going to see what I can learn about this place, right? Or you have White, who wrote a classic book called Street Corner Society, where he just basically put himself on the corner of a street and said, what can I find out, right? And so they were just very pragmatic. They ignored this idea that they could explain everything, right? And at the same time, they also, you know, got rid of this idea that they were completely clueless, that they had no knowledge of anything. And I also look into areas such as, like, you know, social constructionism, which has been probably the most dominant sociological theory of the last 50, 60 years, something like that, right? As well as interpretive work, you know, in the spirit of ethnographers and Max Weber, this Verstehende, this understanding sort of now then as I was learning about social theory, you know, we were entering into these, this was in the 1990s, we were entering into these like post era, right? So we had like postmodernism or POMO, right? We had post-structuralism and so on. And so as I saw them, they were like the descendants of someone such as the deconstructionists, folks like Nietzsche, de Saussure, Derrida, and they were basically, okay, you know, like because they're, they started from the point of view that there was something there and that it could be deconstructed, right? And I think ultimately what for me became dissatisfying about some of the post theories such as postmodernism or post-structuralism was oftentimes this idea that like you could deconstruct something, but then you kind of left people in a place where they had nothing to move to, right? So if you're going to negate something, then it's better if you don't negate everything, right? That you leave something for people to shift to. Because if you're going to say like, guess what? Capitalism doesn't work, right? So what you need is a shift to this, whether it's, I don't know what it is, right? But we don't know what it is, right? But capitalism doesn't work. We can deconstruct it, but if we get rid of it, are we at a greater hazard than if we just like keep it? I don't know. This is a philosophical kind of question. So when I think about like construction and deconstruction, it's very similar to this idea of making connections and making distinctions, right? Putting things together, pulling things apart. And so I think about that as being connected. So in my own, or things that I've considered is that a solution is like looking backwards and forwards at the same time. So like, one solution could be to re-examine the contemporary mediated society via time-tested statements in social theory. And so I think he may be in attendance today. And my close colleague, he's a wonderful person, Massimo Regnetta. I was the deputy editor of the journal Teaching Sociology a long time ago. And we received a book that we were asked to review. It was called The Internet and Social Inequalities by Witte and Mann in 2010 on Routledge. And so I asked Massimo to review this book, and he did a quite nice review of the book. And in it, he basically made the point that a lot of the study of what digital divide and internet, the social inequalities was rather atheoretical. And I would say he's right. At that time, it was largely dominated by like technical theories, and also it was dominated by Marxist or economic logic theories. That is, the digital divide was there because there was a technical barrier, there was an economic barrier, and so on. And so what Witte and Mann did is that they basically they took like Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, right? And they said, let's see what does Marx, would Weber, and what would Durkheim say about these social inequalities in this internet sphere. And so Massimo wrote this review, and then he basically made the point that like why sociology has so many theories of inequalities and stratification. So why is it that something that we're supposed to be moving into this internet society or this digital society, why is it that all of these other social theories have not been translated or applied to something that seems like as present everywhere in the world as the digital transformation? Right. So this led to this book here, which is The Digital Divide, the Internet and Social Inequality in International Perspective, that Massimo and I were edited. And it was an interesting book because we asked each of the authors to select either Marx, Weber, or Durkheim and to speak about a certain nation or regional setting in which they were observing the digital divide and to produce empirical studies of that, right? And then the second point here was about like a way forward is to apply a broad range of social and media theories to new media phenomenon. And in fact, that's what Massimo and I did in the 2017 book called Theorizing Digital Divides. And so we weren't satisfied enough with with just Marx, Weber, Durkheim, these major trajectories of sociological theory as helping us to understand digital divide. What we did was we took it a step further and we edited a book where we invited people to pick sort of any number, feminist theories or post-structural theories, postmodernism, psychoanalysis, so on, any social theory that might be useful for us to understand this idea of theorizing digital divides. So it's just a bit pushing this whole like kind of field in a way to kind of like integrate it with like kind of the sophistication of theory and in the stratification literature that wasn't there yet. And I should probably also mention Massimo has a recent book on Max Weber and the digital divide as well, which is another sort of iteration of this as well. Actually, yeah. All right. So for myself, as I think of an idea, I play with ideas. And so I'll share with you, I don't have a slide for this, but I'll share with you an idea that I'm working on, which is this idea of what I call the data value chain. Okay, the data value chain. There's something in like business studies called the global value chain. And so I'm kind of playing with this idea of the data value chain, and I'm in the very early stages of it. But I've been reading Gerhard Lenski, and Lenski has written this book where he talks about sociocultural evolution. And the basic point of Lenski is that he traces humanity from these different forms of social organization to things like hunter-gatherer societies, to herding societies, to industrial, to agrarian societies, agricultural, to industrial and post-industrial. And the two things that seem to be like the primary movers is the type of productive technology that each of these societies uses and the types of energy that each of the societies use. Right. And so the social organization, the settlement patterns, the cultural institutions reflect in some way the needs and the influence of the productive technologies and the energy sources. Right. So I take it back to thinking about like, here's Durkheim, studying like suicide, and, and Max Weber studying like, the early capitalism or bureaucracy or the economy and society, and Marx looking at the stuff Marx looked at, class struggle and all that. And I see them as being in this historical period where they emerged in this shift from the traditional agricultural village-based societies that tended to use simple forms of technology like plows and animals to pull the plows, right? And then they experienced the Industrial Revolution. And so it was this change of the production technology going from animals and simple technologies to complex factories and advanced machineries, things like steam engines and fossil fuels, things like petroleum, oil, natural gas, and so on. That these things were like kind of what changed from being like kind of small traditional peasant societies where we lived in like, with aristocracy and things. And then we had these like kind of modern societies and everything kind of changed. So now I started off by telling you, I think there's a reason why now is a very fertile time, because Lenski also alludes to this idea of this coming post-industrial age, right? And so, around the world, there are some societies that have pockets of post-industrialism. And so what characterizes post-industrialism is the dominant productive technology is information technologies, computing technologies, ICTs, right? And insofar as we may be able to develop renewable energy sources as well, this could be extremely, extremely influential in terms of changing the post-industrial society as well. So, I'm living in the UAE, and the UAE is a very interesting country. It's basically going to be 50 years old in December, right? It was founded in 1971. And if you went back about 50 years ago, there was about 80,000, 70 to 80,000 people living in this territory, and it was just desert, right? It was just sand. Okay, and so you have the leaders, and you see all the pictures of the leaders, and there they are of some like old building, like a little fortress, and then there's just desert. That's it. And now the society has like 10 million people, right? It's a small country, right? But it has 10 million people. And so it went from like almost like nobody to like, big cities like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, all like almost overnight. And so in this country, it's all based, originally anyway, based on the fossil fuel industry, the oil and gas industry, right? And so I try to tell my students that this place is actually kind of special because like the average Emirati person, in fact, many of the people from outside, like myself, who live in the UAE, we've become actually, people have a very have their standards of living raised very significantly, right? And I point out other examples around the world where the elites discovered oil or some minerals, and then they just basically enriched themselves, and the people continued to be poor and hungry. So what we hear in the UAE all the time is this kind of a new slogan, a new marketing kind of thing where they say data is the new oil, or data is the new petroleum, right? And so this idea that the creation, the capture, the processing, and the deployment of data as a source of value, right? And it becomes actually even a little more abstract when money goes from being we're not on the gold standard. Humanity used to use shells or sticks or something, to trade, and then we had coins, and then we had the paper bills. The paper bills traced back to gold somewhere, right? But then they went off the gold standard, which is only about 50 years ago technically as well, right? And now we have Bitcoin is what, 65,000 US at the moment, something like that, right? And so there is they're literally they have just given away this idea that there's something under it, right? There's no value of Bitcoin other than this perception that somebody else will pay you to get it, right? There is no piece of gold, there is no barrel of oil, there is no cow, that it traces back to. Okay, and so I'm thinking that if we can try to understand this, one of the theories I really liked was world systems theory by Emanuel Wallerstein and others. Binghamton University, I guess, is where these guys were centered. But this idea that the world was laid out in this kind of class-based thing where there was the wealthy, and then there was the in between, and then the poor, right? And that the wealthy get benefited by the poor. And so, I was thinking about this. What if we looked at the overall kind of who controls, who creates, who collects, who controls, and who deploys all of the data? What is the companies in the business studies are talking about the data value chain in terms of capturing and maximizing the revenue for themselves. I'm a bit more interested in sort of looking at the world and understanding how does a certain, say, country or region or company capture the data, right? And so we all know, since we all work in media, that data is is being created and captured all of the time, right? And so I want to look at the world system in a way, maybe the world data system I could call it, I'm not sure. I want to look at the data value chain. And when I have investigated a bit into this, and it's kind of a very early parts, right? But basically there are about 50 corporations in the world that control approximately 90% of the data. So all of the data flows in the world seem to refer back to these 50 companies, and these 50 companies are located in two countries. That's the United States and in China. Okay, and so, say look at, even Europe, right? Let's say Europe, like the EU is big, it's a big economy, very powerful. Even Europe is like less than 5% of the data in this like global data value chain, right? Africa, the entire continent of Africa with all of its countries and all of its people and all of its massive resources, is less than 1%, right? And so if we look back to Karl Marx and like Friedrich Engels, we don't forget him, right? But they actually visited the factories in places like England, and they saw, here's how the people live, and what their life is like, and they studied this, right? So now, where is the new factory? Right? Where are the new information workers? Oh, wait a minute, Bangalore, right? So India, in Bangalore, this is where the big information factories are, or other places like that, right? But it's so interesting that the work of the people doing the IT work translates back to China, translates back to the United States, and their ability to probably earn off of that data, to create value from that data, doesn't refer back to the countries where the data is taken from, right? So as a general statement, I'm thinking like, wow, like if we thought that capital was accumulated in the hands of a very few in the 19th century, where people were working in these terrible factories conditions, right? And the famous labor disputes of the 19th century, early 20th century, and say in my country, like in the United States, in Pittsburgh, where they're literally like shooting the workers for being on strike. I think about that, how there was this capital accumulation of someone like, say Andrew Carnegie was the richest person in the world at the time. And, but it was all based in like steel and railroads and things like that. Now we have like Jeff Bezos, right? The richest person in the world, based on what? I mean, there is a lot of like physical capital there. There's a lot of physical capital there, but not in the same way that some massive petroleum company has this physical capital. So if we see the post-industrial, just the very beginning of the post-industrial age, then I mean, my projection for the future is that the post-industrial age may have like massive problems. If we thought that the early stages of capitalism were problematic for the people due to the concentration of capital in the hands of the capitalists at that time, when we look at the 90% of the world's data going back to two countries with 50 corporations in these two countries, it's way more concentrated at a much earlier stage than the capitalist economy ever was. So I just like to sort of like, I guess, understand this data value chain and how, like we are shifting from the industrial sources of value to how data become, they call it monetized, right? In order to become a source of data. And that's a project that I'm working on. So it's an example, I would say, of kind of a solution of like taking on the big issues, on the big questions, and seeing like what we can learn. And so this New Media, New Society is a project that I already mentioned my colleagues, Dr. Murat in Istanbul and Dr. Massimo in Northumbria in the UK. And myself as well. We're editing a book that is on that is in cooperation with Istanbul University Press. And the goals of the book are to the following. It's like to clarify the emergence and development of one or more key concepts from media studies and social theory, right? So all of these kind of things that I mentioned at the beginning as being like, here's all these concepts of media, here media effects, here are all these concepts of social theories, like let's get people to like, to apply these. And so we went therefore clarify the key media technologies and techniques which are interwoven into such dynamics. Then we're encouraging our contributors to explore the conceptual or empirical aspects of the concept and media practices over the last half century, say since 1970. And then, give us a retrospective historical view. Number 4 is to take stock of what things are happening at the moment. And then 5 is to offer insight or predictions, knowing that, nobody knows the future, right? But if you make an educated guess, you make a prediction, what is it going to be like in the next 50 years or the next half century? And then ultimately at that point, I think that we're encouraging our contributors to assess whether or to what extent, like how much new media dynamics have resulted in new social forms, right? That is, clarify if new media leads to new society by conceptually studying empirically the historical, the present, and then looking towards the future. So this project we have a number of chapters and colleagues all around the world who are contributing. It's already in motion. And so, we have all sorts of topics that we're looking at, including, and, so it's an interesting, I gave a kind of general talk about why this book is necessary and the project, right? And so we have a forthcoming volume, and the project will be a success. It will definitely not be a success, right? And, please expect our forthcoming volume, because my dear colleagues, hocamlar, you are our audience for this book. The book is going to be open access. It's part of the reason why we selected to work with Istanbul University Press, because they wanted to become open access. They wanted to have open access, but also publish in English language as well.
Sorry for the interruption, Professor. Yusuf Yurdagül, can you unmute yourself, please?
No problem.
Yusuf Hocam, sessiz alabilir misiniz kendinizi lütfen?
So I come to an end anyway. No problem. Please don't worry. I say teşekkür ederim. Hocamlar, lütfen dijital olarak bağlayınız. I don't know, is bağlayınız correct or bağlayın? I don't know. Anyhow, in English, it says, thank you very much to my dear colleagues, and thank you. Please connect digitally. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here today.
It's been our honor. Thank you so much, Professor Glenn. Is there any question for Professor or any comments that you would like to make? Our guests, you can unmute yourself and talk. Or you can use the chat box to write your questions. I think there's none. Herhangi bir soru sormak isteyen, yorum yapmak isteyen var mıdır? Okay, Professor Glenn, it's all clear or not clear at all, I think, your speech. As you say in the disclaimer part. So no further ado, thank you very much. It was our pleasure and honor to hear your speech. Is there anything you would like to add?
Oh, I'm a great friend and fan of Turkey. So it's been unfortunately 2 years since I've been able to visit Turkey, and I I can't wait for the pandemic to end so I can come and enjoy some proper chai. I was visiting professor at Erzincan University, and also I worked with my colleagues, Dr. Ayub and Dr. Said, and also the other Dr. Doigu, who you may know, is in Mersin now, I think. But anyway, I very much have enjoyed visiting the, East Anatolia, and I have not been to Anadolu University in, what is the town? Eskişehir. Eskişehir.
Yes.
Yeah, I have not been there yet, but I actually stayed in the Anadolu University guest house in Istanbul.
In Aksaray, yes.
yeah, the other Aksaray, right? The section of Istanbul. Yeah. Anyhow, so it's been a pleasure, and I miss you all. I would so much love to take a trip back. I moved to the UAE 3 years ago, and I thought, hey, no problem. I'll just fly to Turkey anytime I want, and then it would be like 3 hours, no big deal. And then of course the pandemic messed up everything for all of us. But I wish you all the health and blessings, and I miss you. If you ever come to the UAE, Abu Dhabi, we would love to welcome you here. And please be in contact about like working together, about working on projects, or even any just discussions. And it doesn't matter if you're like the most experienced professor, I'm happy to talk to you. If you're just starting out and you're like a research assistant, and I'm happy to talk to you as well. And so thank you all so much. God bless you, and have a wonderful conference. I'm going to plug in later to see some of the talks this evening.
Thank you very much, Professor. Likewise, it was nice to meet you really. We would like to welcome you in Eskişehir too in some day. So goodbye for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Değerli katılımcılar, saat 2'de 3 paralel oturumumuz devam ediyor şu an girmek isterseniz eğer. Biri gazetecilik, diğeri dijital gazetecilik, diğeri ise social networks. Teşekkür ederiz katılımlarınız için.